Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book. And I'm so excited to see you guys tonight. I feel like it's been forever. The last virtual event that we did was on November 19th. We took the week of Thanksgiving off so that way people didn't have to debate tuning into events or doing family stuff. And we also just wanted the nice break. We did do our Murder by the Book Recommends event Saturday in store. It's the first time we've actually had customers in store for any kind of event since March of 2020. And it was really great to see a lot of familiar faces and just be able to sit in the bookstore and talk about some of our favorite books of the year. So thank you, everybody who came out if you were watching this evening. We are starting to book some in-store stuff for January and February of 2022. So if you check out the event calendars for then, you will see stuff listed either as virtual or in-store. That's obviously pending. We're watching the news closely with the new variant and all of that stuff. It seems like every time we start to schedule some in-store stuff, some new variant pops up to just, raise my blood pressure. So we're hoping that we're still going to get to see some authors in January and February, but just keep an eye out. We have contingency plans if we have to go virtual for those. Also wanted to mention tomorrow night, I'm going to be back chatting with two more Kensington authors. I'm going to be chatting with Amanda Flower and MV Byrne about their new releases. And then Sarah Strohmeyer is going to be on Friday. Next Tuesday, we'll be chatting with Paige Shelton. And also wanted to mention, if you are historical fiction fans, which you probably are if you were tuning in tonight, Stephen Spotswood, who wrote a really great book set in the 40s. It's sort of a gender-flipped Archie Goodwin, Nero Wolfe book. The second one, Murder Under Her Skin, comes out on next Tuesday, and December 14th, we're going to be doing a virtual event with him, and we just confirmed that Alan Bradley is going to be the moderator for that, so we're super excited about that one. As I am chatting with Darcie tonight about A Counterfeit Suitor, if you have questions for her about this one, about the books that she writes as Jennifer Hawkins, any of the previous books in the series, please post those in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will get to them in just a little bit. But for this evening, I'm going to get us started. I'm going to bring Darcie out. How are you tonight?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me virtually to the store again.
My pleasure. It's good to see you. And I'm excited to chat with you about this new book.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun writing this one.
So for everybody tuning in, A Counterfeit Suitor is the fifth book in the Rosalind Thorne series by Darcie Wilde. And Darcie Wilde is the award-winning author of stylishly adventurous historical mysteries and romances, including the Rosalind Thorne Mysteries, a Regency-set series inspired by the novels of Jane Austen, as well as the Regency Makeover Trilogy. She has also written under the name Sarah Zettel, Locus and Philip K. Dick award-winning novels, including Fool's War, which was a New York Times notable book of the year. And she lives in Michigan and can be found online at darciewilderomance.com. As I mentioned, tonight we're going to be chatting about the newest Rosalind Thorne. So to get us started, can you tell everybody a little bit about what Rosalind and the gang are up to in this new one?
In this one, Rosalind starts out in what she thinks is going to be a very simple situation. She's being asked basically to do a background check. There is a London mama who is a little worried about this young man who is courting her daughter. She is not entirely sure about his background. So since Rosalind knows everybody, which is what makes her such a useful woman, she's checking the guy out and finding out there are in fact some things to be worried about in the background. But as things go forward, she finds out there may be a little more to worry about than the suitor. In fact, the mama and her family may be the bigger problem after all.
So one of the things that I love about this one we were talking about before we got started is, as you said, it starts out and Rosalind thinks it's going to be this really easy thing. And then it just kind of starts to snowball and the plot kind of gets more intricate as you go. Rosalind's guessing what's going on. We're guessing what's going on. So as a writer, did you plot all of that out, or did you kind of figure out all of that while you were working on it?
I would like to say that I planned it all in advance. But the truth is, usually while I'm writing, I'm still researching. and I will come across new wrinkles, which will give me new ideas, which will cause me to have to go back and rewrite and restructure what I've already done. And of course, the characters will start telling me new things, or they will stop dead and the scene doesn't work, and I will have to go back and I will have to figure out what it is I've missed. Because usually when the words stop showing up, it's because I haven't looked at something fully. I'm not seeing what a particular character really is after in the scene. So I'm not a complete plotter. I'm not a complete pantser. I sort of work it in stages. Sometimes I'm doing the one, sometimes I'm doing the other. And in the end, hopefully there's a book.
Yeah. One of the things I think that's really interesting, and you talk about this in the book, and I think we talked about it last time we chatted, is I always forget that during this time period that if people wanted the police to investigate a crime, they actually had to pay them to do it. So can you talk a little bit about that? And why do you think that it's something that we don't see other authors mention when they're writing about this time period?
Well, because it is what law enforcement they had is really entirely foreign to our way of thinking about things. For one thing, crime, there was really only one form. Okay, there were two forms of crime. There was property crime, and there was a crime against the crown. And a crime against the crown could include murder, because murder was a breach of the king's peace. So if you killed somebody, you were making things tough for the king. The king's job is to keep the peace and keep everybody safe. So you were directly attacking the king if you murdered somebody. So that had to be dealt with specially. Property crime, something got stolen, your house got broken into, your wife had an affair. That was considered a private matter, and you were supposed to solve it privately. That meant paying for private help if you needed it, if you could afford it. So you could have what help you could pay for. And the Bow Street Runners, famously, and were not anything like what we'd consider a modern police force. They were more like a detective agency. If somebody needed something or someone found, they would write to the office, they would pay a fee, and maybe if they were available, one of the officers would be sent out to investigate. And by investigate, we mean talk to people, read the local papers, because by the time this all got into motion, there was no crime scene. Even if there was any notion of forensic sciences, which there weren't, there would have been nothing left. No one's going to leave a room untouched, let alone a corner of the street untouched, until someone can get there, which could be days or weeks. So it's really an alien environment compared to the way we think of policing and investigation.
Yeah. So one of the things I also really love about this one is we get to see, Alice, she and Rosalind are now sharing a residence. So we get to see a lot more of her, and we get to see her kind of really get actively involved in the investigation. Was she, as a character, is she based on anybody that you found while you were doing research?
Yes and no. I know I love Alice. Alice, I love everything about this series, but writing Alice is so much fun. Because she has so come to inhabit the life she has landed in. She's decided that this is like the best thing since sliced bread for her. But there were women like her. I found women like her all over the place. In the Regency, there were very few options for a gently bred or aristocratic lady to make money if the people who were supposed to provide for them failed to provide for them. In Alice's case, her father lost his money speculating and gambling, and then he killed himself and left the family destitute. So she and her brother both had to suddenly find a way to make a living. And what happened was women would write because it was something they could do from home. It was something they could do anonymously, so they didn't have to put themselves out front. They could sort of, do this in the background, which made it acceptable. Women were also taught, they were not taught Greek and Latin, but they were taught modern languages. So they were taught French, they were taught German, they were taught Italian. And so they could take articles and newspapers and accounts of travels from foreign countries and translate them for use by the English magazines. And you could make a decent living doing that kind of work, as well as writing gossip, writing poetry paid during the Regency, kind of better than it does now. So these were all things you could do under a pseudonym or anonymously. And so it was a respectable way for a woman in straights to make a living. And a lot of the women writers I found are women whose husbands had died or whose fathers had failed the family. So, so Alice is a possibility for the time period.
And I love that throughout the book, you shifted viewpoints. So we don't always see everything from Rosalind's viewpoint. We get it from, it might be Alice, it might be Adam, it might be one of the suspects. So what was your decision to have those perspective shifts throughout the story?
Because I like to know everything. I've been doing that one from the first, but the characters, there were so many varied characters, and I wanted to be able to show all their interactions. So yeah, I just couldn't pass up the chance to have the really juicy conversations happening. In Counterfeit Suitor, the family arguments were they play a big part, and I could not resist showing them to the reader. I also think in a mystery, it can increase suspense if the audience knows a little bit more than the protagonist. So, I made a decision from the beginning that I was going to use that as a tool for plotting the Rosalind books.
It's so fun because, you get to know these other secondary characters that you love so well. And like you said, it does build suspense, especially in this one, because, you have, this other family that's kind of involved in stuff, but you don't really kind of know what's going on. But like, as you said, you get to hear them kind of arguing and we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And you still don't really know what's going on. So it's fun. It's almost like you're solving like multiple mysteries as you're going through it.
Yeah. And seeing everybody act on pieces of what they know. No one's got all the information. Everybody's just working with their particular part. The author who was the absolute master of that particular technique was Jean Le Carré. Nobody could write someone working from a partial point of view like Le Carré. Just gorgeous at it.
Also, in this new book, we get to see, it's been teased through the previous books. We know that Rosalind's father has gone away. We know that, she hasn't really had much interaction with her sister until the previous books, but still that wasn't a ton of interaction. So there's always sort of been this kind of family reunion that you knew was going to happen at some point, kind of hanging over her. Did you know what that was going to be once they all got put together, or did that kind of morph as you were working on the books in the series?
That definitely morphed. Charlotte surprised me coming into this book. I knew obviously that Charlotte was going to be, this book is very much about families. This book is about the family Rosalind is dealing with and about her own family. And I knew Charlotte was going to be playing a bigger part. I did not know everything Charlotte had been doing over the past few years. That came as a major surprise to me as I was researching this, and the research for this involved Napoleonic spies, English spies, all of which was much less formal than it is now. A lot like policing. And various plots and conspiracy theories, which got weirder the further I went. So, as I was learning about that, and as this is where writers start to sound very schizophrenic, but as the characters were talking to me, Charlotte was letting me know that part of the reason she'd been keeping her distance is She'd maybe been up to some walking a little further on the wild side than anybody had quite realized.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about their relationship is clearly, as you're reading the book, you can tell that these two sisters have really missed each other. Like, they were close when they were young, and now there's been this big rift in the family and parents taking each kid. And you can tell that they've clearly missed each other, but that they're also still so wounded by that rift. So you can see them like kind of get close to each other and then like put up defenses. I thought that just the dynamic between the two of them and like them trying to figure out what this relationship was going to be, I thought was done really, really well.
Thank you. They'd been separated for so long and they'd chosen such different paths. I didn't want there to be an Insta reunion. I really wanted them to be circling each other, trying to understand, trying to find out how far they could trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in part because they had chosen such different lives.
Yeah.
And they had so little knowledge or understanding of what had been happening.
So Diane mentions in the comment, she says she's just read the first book and she's anxious to continue the others, but she wants to know, can you jump to this one or should she read them in order?
Well, you could jump. If you have read the first one, you have got the majority of what you need. But yeah, obviously I'm going to say read them in order, get the whole story, because there are some arcs that happen, throughout these 5 books are more or less a set. Obviously we're going to have more. I am working on the next one right now. And very excited about how it's going. But these 5 books are kind of one. There is an arc that goes through them, and it is settled in number 5. So you can jump in anywhere, but I think you might enjoy it if you read them all.
Yeah, I think so too. And I would, I don't usually say this because I think you can jump in with this one, but I would say like if you are going to jump, I would at the very least maybe read last year's before this one, just because there's some characters in this one that you see last time.
Yeah, they're pretty.
Yeah, we talked about this last time, but for those reading might know that the first 2 books in the series came out. And then we had a gap before And Dangerous to Know came out. So can you talk a little bit about how, and because this doesn't happen very often, can you talk a little bit about how you came to get to move to a new publisher to continue the series?
Well, my editor did it first. So what happened was, the first 2 books came out, and then my fabulous editor, Wendy McCurdy, got a new job and became a VP over at Kensington Books. And then my initial publisher, they decided that they weren't going to continue the Rosalind series. And I was very, very bummed. I had all these other stories I wanted to tell. So I took a chance and I emailed Wendy and I said, hey, Wendy, they've dropped the series. Would you and Kensington be interested in picking it up? And somewhat to my surprise, because you're right, it doesn't happen. Yeah. But Wendy said, yes, absolutely. And we got 3 more books and 2 more to follow.
Oh, so 2 more. That's exciting.
There's going to be 2 more. There's
awesome.
Going to be 2 more.
Yeah. So I've also noticed, obviously the last 2 that have come out, A Counterfeit, Suitor, and last year's book, A Lady Compromised, are longer than the first couple were. And I know we talked a little bit about how the plot for this one, and I think last year's too, were a little bit more intricate. Can you talk a little bit about kind of book length and why you needed more space to tell these stories?
Because I'm desperately wordy. I am someone who likes a big book. So if I am allowed to get away with it, I will write a fat book. But obviously a fat book has just got to justify itself. So the plots have gotten a little more complicated, and I feel they require more length, and thankfully my editor agreed with me, because I did have to cut these. Both of them used to be longer. Both of them are between 5,000 and 7,000 words shorter than when I initially finished them. So, but I think they read better for it. And and long-windedness can be a danger. You can start losing your plot, your reader, yourself. So it is a very fine balancing act. But yeah, these two got a little more complicated, so they need a little more length. And fortunately, for the most part, my editor agreed.
So what happens when you cut that much out of a book? Is that something that just goes in the trash, or do you hang on to it because you might be able to use it later?
Mostly what happens is tears, recrimination, and swearing. But it really depends. Mostly it just goes away. But every now and again, there's something to save. There's a description that sparks another idea that didn't quite fit. And that I will put in a file. And when I'm looking for new ideas, I will go back and review the ones that didn't quite make the cut and see if that spark is still there.
So you mentioned while you were doing research for this one, the research into the Napoleonic spies and conspiracies just kept getting weirder and weirder. So when you're doing research, how do you know how weird you can go with what you're writing based on kind of what people's perceptions are? So that way you're like up to that point where you can still have kind of that suspension of disbelief, but not go so far that people are like, this would never happen, even though it potentially did.
Yeah. And sometimes the way I approached it in this one, because some of the stuff surrounding Napoleon while in exile is so weird. You touch on it and you have the characters remark on how weird it is. Yeah. That way you're sharing the knowledge with your audience that, yes, in fact, you're not wrong. This is really effing strange. Look, the people who are in it think it's really effing strange. So that's a tool I frequently use because, again, when you really start digging into the history as it happened, it is much stranger and much more alien than the history maybe we've been presented or think we know. So you do have to do a balancing act, because we say this in my writers group, just because it's real doesn't mean it's believable.
Yeah.
So you have to spend, framing it is important.
Which I think, we've seen, with the last couple of years news stories, we have all kinds of thriller writers talk about how like there are all these weird things happening in the world. And if I put this in a book, my editor would be like, this is stupid. No one would believe that.
And that happens all the time. And you cannot, just because it's real doesn't mean it's believable. So, if you have something that is really funky, like the possibility of rescuing Napoleon by hot air balloon, or the fact that people thought he was going to be set up to be Emperor of Mexico, two of which things were for real. These are genuine facts. And there's some really good books about this stuff. Yeah. You have to frame it. You have to give the reader, you either have to touch on it extremely lightly and move on, or you have to give the reader enough context that they can buy into it. But you can't let it slow down the plot. So you have to pick and choose. If you're dealing in these strange things, you really gotta pick with care.
So in the book, at the beginning of each chapter, you have these little excerpts from other things. Where do those little epigrams come from? Is it things that you have written yourself, or are they things that you discover while you're researching?
So I have an unhealthy love of 19th century literature. And so it started, and that is really what started this entire journey. Jane Austen was not the only lady writer of her time. There were other women writing at the same time, and some of them were intensely prolific, and most of them have been forgotten. Most of them have been forgotten because they should be forgotten. I'm telling you, most of these books are really bad. Really bad. Yeah. But the original idea for the Rosalind Thorne came to me when I was reading one of these other books. It's called Almack's, and it is about the famous ballroom and center of the marriage mart. And it is long and it is rambling, and it's actually a very important book because this book changed the libel laws in England. There were real people portrayed in this book, and it caused such a sensation that the laws were literally changed to make it tougher for fictional writers to portray real people. But in the middle of this long rambling book was a paragraph describing a character who had fallen on hard times, who was moving from house to house. And when she was at any house, she made herself useful by being an unpaid social secretary. And I read that and I'm like, why have I never seen this character portrayed in fiction? And that's when Rosalind Thorne was born. But that was only one of them. I keep reading these books, and all the authors mentioned in the epigrams are real authors, and all the quotes are quotes from their work. I'm not recommending necessarily people go and find them, but I found a lot of them because they were favorite authors of Jane Austen, or they were people who were heavily influenced by Jane Austen, or they were the bestsellers of their time. So this gives me new ideas. This helps me, keep a flavor of the language, and it kind of endlessly amuses me because some of these books are so absurd.
And so are those books, are they all in the public domain now, so it's easy to use them, or do you still have to acquire rights for them to use them?
No, they are all very much in the public domain. A lot of them have been digitized. I have access. I live in Michigan. I have access to the University of Michigan's digital collection. And that's where I pull most of these up from. I will hear about an author from another source, from a podcast or from a blog, and I will say, somebody else, go check out the University of Michigan catalog, see what they've got digitized. And it's great because you can find these really wonderfully obscure manuscripts. And, you don't have to worry about getting the only copy, going to the reading room. You can have it, you can make notes out of it, whatever you need.
So at what point in the writing process do you assign those little epigrams to the chapters? Is it happening while you're writing, or is it something that you go in and do when you're done?
It happens throughout. I will be reading one of these, and they're a real zinger will stand out for me, and I will mark the page for later. And then, as I'm writing, I will go back. I keep a file, and I will go back through the file and say, oh yeah, that's going to work for this chapter.
So we talked a little bit about research. So one of the things I also love is the descriptions of the Graham Club in this one, because it just seems like it's just this, especially the rooms and stuff, it just seems like this wonderfully ridiculous, tacky place. So is it based on a real club?
It is based on descriptions of some of the gambling hells. There were all levels of clubs in England. There were every possible category of interest had its club. And some of them were very grand and very respectable. The Prince of Wales, okay, he's not going to be respectable, but belonged to 6 or 8. Beau Brummel belonged to a particular club that was heavily noted for its dandies and its gambling. And there were some really, you couldn't have a casino in London, but you could gamble in a club, and you could kind of gamble in a private home if you said it was it's just a party. So they had these clubs that were set up as gambling halls for the members. And yeah, they were lush and elaborate, and yeah, you could have your private apartment in them, and consort with all kinds of people. You could also entirely lose the farm in a night if you tried.
So Susan wants to know, she says, what writer, past or present, would you most enjoy meeting?
Oh, that is always such a tough question. Honestly, Dorothy Parker. First of all, because, it would be so entertaining. But also because she was an absolutely fascinating woman. She was, very troubled, but so intelligent, and an early, when she died, she left all her money to the NAACP. So she was a very early civil rights advocate, and some of her short fiction is just, I would love to ask her about, where this came from,
Mhm.
because it's so unexpected. I mean, what we know about her mostly is some quips and people know a few poems, but the stories she wrote are just fascinating, compact little gems.
Yeah. So we mentioned in your bio, or we mentioned that you also have written under several other names. We talked last time about the Vampire Chef novels that you wrote as Sarah Zettel, and we mentioned that you also write the Chatty Corgi series as Jennifer Hawkins. Can you tell everybody a little bit about the Chatty Corgi series?
Okay, well, the Chatty Corgi series are contemporary cozy. They are set in Cornwall, in the village of Trevenna, and our main character, Emma Reed, has left a 25-year career in London high finance to follow her dream and open a tea shop, where she's going to bake pies and cakes based on her grandmother's recipes. And Emma is really a normal middle-aged person starting her second act in life. The only unusual thing about her is she has a corgi dog who does talk. Only Emma's the only one who can understand him. She doesn't know why or how this happened. It seems to be a trait that pops up in her family on occasion. But together they solve crime. This was not something they planned. They found a old lady dead in her house from what turned out to and what turned into be a murder, and they wound up investigating. And Oliver is a character in the story, and he has his own chapters. Oliver is the corgi, and he is an absolute darling to write. I have such fun with these.
And we have a comment that says, I love both the Rosalind and Chatty Corgi series. I just went to squeeze Oliver and eat Emma's treats. So are you a baker, or did you learn to bake any of the stuff that she does?
I am an amateur baker. I am a great fan of the Great British Baking Show and a number of other silly baking competitions. So I could bake some of what Emma bakes, but it probably wouldn't turn out as well.
So since you've written, you've kind of genre hopped and you've written under several pseudonyms, how do you decide when it's time to do something under a pseudonym, and how do you decide what that pseudonym is going to be?
That is a decision that gets made with the editor. It's a lot about branding, so that people know what they're getting. When you see a Darcie Wilde book, it's going to be historical,
Mhm.
and it might be a little bit more in depth. When you see a Jennifer Hawkins book, that's going to be a cozy, and it is going to be cute, and it is going to be fluffy, and I love a cozy. I love a good, light, fluffy read. So I don't want anyone to think I'm being dismissive. But the name generally goes with a type of story. A Sarah Zettel, it's going to be more suspense. Although the Vampire Chef.
Those were
Um,
so fun. They were so fun.
Thank you. I had the best time. I was so frustrated when that series ended because they let me end the second book on a cliffhanger, and I still get people saying, "Are there going to be any more?"
Yeah.
And it's not a case where I can continue it myself,
Yeah.
which again frustrates me endlessly. But so that's something me and the editors will decide together. And the name, usually I'll suggest a couple things, they'll say yes or no, and we'll
Mhm.
go back. There'll be a few back and forths till we settle on something that everybody's happy with.
Yeah. So, since you have kind of hopped around genres while you've been writing, do you have a favorite? And is there anything that you like just really want to tackle at some point that you haven't yet?
I love the historical mysteries. I mean, I I get bored easily. So I enjoy genre hopping because I love a chance to try something new. Ooh, new, shiny. Let me dig in. Let me find out what this is like. Let me see who's living in here and who will talk to me about it.
Mhm.
Um, but I am a history nerd. We keep coming back to the research here because that's one of my favorite parts of writing Rosalind is there's always something new to learn. There's always some bit of trivia or some new person to discover. For example, I recently found a new book that is essentially a visiting guide to London. Okay, it's a new old book. It was printed in 1814. But in the front matter, the printer reveals herself to be the mother of 7 children, that she has taken over the business when her husband died. And also she's having employment problems. There is a page where she says that some guy who used to be in her employment is going around faking still being in her employment and selling. Yes, this is in a page. It's a warning. Please don't believe this guy. He is no longer my employee. What the hell is this? From 1814. I love that it is hopelessly nerdy, but I love that kind of stuff. And writing mysteries and historicals gives me a chance to keep digging in and keep finding more stuff like that.
So you mentioned that you're still doing research while you're writing, but do you do a lot of research before you get started? And at what point do you say, "Hey, I've got enough. It's time to start putting some stuff on the page, and I can fill in gaps later"?
I pretty much always have one eye out for something new. By now I've got a fair understanding of the Regency, but there's always something new. There's always a new biography of women's lives coming out. There's always something. So I am more or less, and since I love it anyway, I'm more or less always reading that and getting new ideas. Just finished an old book about a woman named Anne Brandon, who was a Scottish aristocrat. She held her title in her own right and wound up being essentially a government civil servant, was involved in the colonization of South Africa, climbed high mountains wearing pants in the Regency, stuff like this. Never heard of her. Now I have.
Awesome.
And she makes an appearance in the next book, or at least her presence is known in the next book. Yeah. So there's always something, and it'll find a way in.
So what was it about the Regency period that drew you to it for this series? And was there any point where you had dabbled or with the idea of potentially setting Rosalind in a different time period?
No, I never did. And what drew me in was, well, I write Regency romance, and I was casting around. Originally, I had thought I was going to be writing a romance. When I talked about that book, Almax, as I was casting around for ideas for romances, that was when I decided to read this book. I'd heard about it. It was Lady Hudson Spencer Stanhope, I think was the full name. I'd heard about it, and I read it, and I found that paragraph about the useful woman, and I wrote a sample that I thought was going to turn into a romance, and I sent it to Wendy, my editor, and she's the one who turned around and said, "You know what? This ought to be a mystery." And so Rosalind was in the Regency from the beginning because her inspiration was entirely in the Regency.
And I think, obviously I guess not spoiler if people have read the first book, obviously they're not romance because we don't get a happily ever after at the end of books because there's an arc going on. So, but I think that you do such a really good job, obviously, because you are a romance writer, but you do such a good job of including just enough kind of the romance element and the mystery element. You balance them so well. So I really think even romance readers, if they pick them up knowing that there's not going to be a happy ever after edit, I think that they would still also find a lot to love in these too.
There may be happily ever after yet. We're working on it. Yeah. Rosalind is a cautious individual. Rosalind is in very odd circumstances, and she is really not sure. It's not that Rosalind does not love. She is in love,
Yeah.
But marriage for her is a really complicated situation. So she cannot enter into it lightly, and we will be going into more of that complication and watching how those two navigate it.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why she's such a good character, because like whether it's getting married or so much of what she does impacts so many people around her, whether it's her sister, the potential person she wants to marry, Alice. There are so many other people that would be impacted by the decisions that they make. And it makes her such a good character because she's aware of all of this and she takes all of that to heart too.
Well, and that's very much something I garnered out of reading the novels of the time. We see it in Jane Austen. Pick your book, Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice. The decision, let's say Pride and Prejudice, the decisions made by one sister impact everybody. Lydia's decision to run away with Wickham potentially destroys the entire family. Because of what she did, nobody's going to be able to get married, to have their own life. So, when I was writing, I very much wanted to make sure that came in, that, as much as we want to be able to, and we want our characters to be able to follow their hearts, you had to consider with what you did, the impact it was going to have on the relationships around you. You act too carelessly, and it's not just you who's going to end up in trouble.
So as the series progresses and we get to see, as Rosalind takes on new cases, she ends up meeting, there's new characters and the world is always expanding. So do you have a series Bible that you use so you can kind of keep track of everybody?
I keep most of it in my head. I keep a running series of notes, and yeah, I do have. It's not a Bible so much; it's a set of notes. Reminders of who, what, and where. And one of the things I did, and I'm still working my way through to prep with this latest is reread. I am going back and I am rereading the series, and it's really interesting. It's just, oh, what was that? But it's always educational to find out how much you've personally forgotten, because for me the first book was forever ago. A lot of water has gone under the mental bridge since that one. So it's been an interesting experience going back and starting from the beginning.
As you've done that, has there been anything like plot wise or like big plot points where you were like, oh, if I was doing this now, I would do it differently?
The first two books could have been tighter. The first two books, we've got some loose ends and some wandering in them. Not that they're not still brilliant books. Obviously, they are brilliant books, and you should all run out and order them immediately from Murder by the Book, preferably. Yeah. But I got better. I think, I honestly, not to toot my own horn, but I think as a writer, as I gain more experience with this world and these characters, I think the plots got better. I think the first two, they're good, but they could have used more trimming than they got.
So Leah wants to know, is there any chance for possible spin-offs?
Not currently. But believe me, if Alice keeps this up, she's coming very close to earning a series of her own, because she cannot be contained.
There's so much potential. Like Alice, we could figure out what Charlotte's been up to while she's been off. You have so many characters who spend so much time off the page that that would be awesome.
And doing one. People do the Bow Street Runners. That's there are a number of books and series based off the Bow Street Runners. But knowing what I know, I would like to see one that digs into the chaos that existed before 1828, which was when the Metropolitan Police was formed and modern policing as we know it began. So it might be fun to dig into something with Adam's colleagues, at the police station.
Mhm. One of the things that I just read that I love, that I think if people like your books, they will definitely love too. Amanda Collins has two mysteries out. The first one's A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem, and her second
Oh,
one.
yes.
Mhm. And so the second one, they have very similar titles to the Diane Freeman ones, but the second one, An Heiress's Guide to Deception and Desire, just came out. And what I love about hers too is, she also plays with that romance series trope of, different couples for each books. So the first one is Lady Catherine, and kind of similarly, she and her friend Caro have a newspaper column. So in the second book, you get Caro, and she's the one that's solving the mystery with a little bit of help from Lady Catherine. And it's fun to see sort of how, so it's sort of fun to see how she has this series, but like it's not the same detective in both books, which has been really fun too.
Yeah. Interesting. I'll have to check those out.
So we talked about how you love literature from this time period that you're writing about, but so what do you read contemporarily? Do you read in the mystery and romance genre as well?
I do. And let's see, I just finished, I mentioned Le Carré, one of my favorites. I just finished Silverview, which was his last novel. I just finished The Boyfriend Project, which is a contemporary rom-com, which was worlds of fun. And so I've been reading a lot of rom-com. Rom-com is kind of, is having a moment. And there have been a ton of good books written as contemporary rom-com. And so, if that's a genre people enjoy, now is your time. So been doing a lot of that. And I just read, it's not a mystery or a romance, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous book. Light from Uncommon Stars.
Ooh.
And I am blanking on the author's name.
I'm looking it up right now.
It is a kind of surreal book. It has got galactic refugees running a donut shop in LA, because apparently that is what you do in LA. And also a violin teacher who has made a deal with the devil. And the devil does show up from time to time. This is quite literal. So, and I love deal with the devil stories. It's a thing. I read them whenever I can find them. And it is about found family. It is about caring for one another. It's so much classical music and violin neepery. I can't even. It was just such a beautiful book.
It sounds fantastic. So I just dropped a link in the comments if anybody wants to check it out. The author is Rika Aoki, and it sounds like from a common star. It sounds fantastic. I'm going to have to order a copy of this for myself once we're done chatting.
It is not a mystery, but it is a wonderful read.
I have been going through a little bit of a reading rut. Like, a lot of people were saying, like, when the pandemic first started, they're like, I'm having a really hard time getting into stuff. Like, I was blowing through books for a good, I don't know, until like the last 2 months. And then it just plummeted. And I was like, I'm stuck. I can't get through anything. And it was rom-coms that pulled me out of it. I read Aaron Sterling's The Ex-Hex and Lana Harper's Payback's a Witch. And there was Gwenda Bond's Not Your Usual Nice Guy, something like that. But it was rom-coms that pulled me out of it and got me to be able to jump back into stuff again.
Something light, someplace where you can, a book home where you can be secure. Yeah. In the end, it's gonna be okay. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. Yeah. It's like, so much of mystery is about justice. One of the reasons I love cozies, I love golden age classics, because I know in the end, the bad guy will be caught. There will be justice. So I can go in feeling secure. I can relax and follow the twists and turns and the emotional ups and downs. Yeah. And sometimes that's what you want.
Yeah. So would you consider, I mean, there's definitely some overlap there. Would you consider the Darcie Wilde, the Rosalind Thorne books, would you consider them cozies?
I would not call them cozies. I would call them traditionals.
Yeah.
There is a mystery to be solved. In the end, it will be solved. Yeah. And somebody is, and justice will be served. don't do the bad guy gets away in the end sort of thing. Spoiler alert. Um, so I would call them traditional, but I would not necessarily call them cozy.
Yeah.
They're, how do I say this? Cozy has a tighter scope. You know, the setting, even if it's in a big city, like No Memes of Escape, which Olivia Black highly recommended. It's Brooklyn. This is not a small place, but she gives it that village feel that it's very much about that community. And I don't think you can really separate community out from cozy. So while Rosalind has a posse, these stories are not necessarily about community so much.
Yeah. That's a good distinction, because I would say they were more traditional too, but I don't know where I would like draw that line about what makes them not quite cozy. But that's a good distinction there, that like she has her own little group, but it's not about like the community.
There's also blood on the page.
Yeah.
Cozies generally do not put the blood on the page. And while there's not a lot of blood in the Rosalind books, we get blood on the page.
Yeah. So you said you were working on the next 2 books in the series. Can you give us a little bit of a teaser about what they might be up to next?
Well, this one, the next one, which is going to be called, well, the working title is The Secret of the Lost Pearls. Ooh. Different title style, but there we go. Is the closest I've come to something that's actually riffing off of Jane Austen. But Rosalind is we have a missing pearl necklace. We have some art of uncertain provenance making an appearance. We have a ne'er-do-well coming and troubling the family that Rosalind has been asked to help. And we're dealing with something that comes up a lot in the books of the period, which is fraudulent marriage. The 19th century, they were deeply, deeply concerned about this kind of thing, and they wrote about it a lot. So this is where all that reading of these very weird books comes in. So I've taken some of those ideas and I've run with it.
So you mentioned, working title. All the previous books in this series had such great titles. So can you talk a little bit about the process of coming up with the titles?
It's again, this is one of those give and takes. I will propose a title to my editor, and she'll say, and they actually have departments of people who work on these things. And it will get taken around Kensington, and people will say, and she'll come and that is usually the response. And she'll come back with me and say, nah, can we try again?
Yeah.
Let me see. I think the original title for A Lady Compromised was A Suspicious Character. And that did not fly real well. So we wrangled back and forth. And usually there's 2 or 3 go rounds. And a number of different inputs.
So Debbie wants to know, since we've been talking about it, she says she wants to know, what do we mean by the phrase "in the Regency"? Can you give her like kind of a little Cliff Notes version of what the Regency period is?
Yeah. The Regency period in England is roughly between 1812 and 1820. And what happened at that time was King George III, of the Revolutionary War fame, lost his mind. He had a hereditary disease they now know called porphyria. And it was, of course, they knew nothing about it at the time. And one of the things it does to you is it makes you lose your marbles. So the king went mad and couldn't fulfill the duties as king. So Parliament decided that even though the king was alive, they needed somebody else to be the head of state. And that somebody else was his oldest son, also named George. And Prince George got the title of Prince Regent, which meant that he wasn't king, but he was running the country. And the Regency refers to the period during which Prince George was running the country, but was not yet King George IV, whom he would eventually become.
One of my other favorite Regency series, they're a little bit darker and a little bit more gruesome than the Rosalind Thorne books, are C.S. Harris's Sebastian St. Cyr books.
And yes.
And I love that she started them in like 1811, just before the Regency starts. So you kind of sort of get to see some of the lead up to that period. Those are also, have you read those?
I have read some of them. There are a lot of them.
There are a lot.
I've read some of them, and they're really, really well written. Yeah, you're right. They are darker. They're gritty. But she does such a good job.
Yeah, I'm a couple books behind. I've been saving them for some point where I'm like ready to just like binge read several of them. So Leo wants to know, do you have plans to continue the series after the 2 that you're working on now, or is that kind of up in the air?
That is up in the air at the moment. We will see. It may be one of those cases where we got other things, other projects to go to. I love Rosalind. I love the world, but I have this problem. I'm easily bored. So, it may be, and we may mutually decide it's time to move on, but that does not mean it's over. There may be short stories that come up. There may be some electronic publications. So that's a couple of years in the future at this point, and a lot of things can happen between now and then.
Yep, as if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's yeah. All right, so I think that's going to about do it time-wise for tonight. So just to recap for anyone who might have joined us while we have been chatting with Darcie Wilde, and the newest book in the Rosalind Thorne series has just come out today. It is A Counterfeit, Suitor. It's number 5. If you do want to go back and start with the first one, it is called A Useful Woman. We've got copies of all of them in store. I've dropped links if you want to order copies from us. We hope that you will. If you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive them so you can go back and rewatch. If you want to check out last year's event when we were talking about last year's book, which was A Lady Compromised, it is also up on the store's Facebook and YouTube channel, as well as the other virtual events that we have been doing. Darcie, again, congratulations on the new book. Happy release day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a great time.
Oh, my pleasure. One of the things that's been great about these virtual events is getting to meet authors that we've potentially read for a while and maybe have not been to the store, and we're excited to be able to keep doing some stuff like this. So it was great to chat with you this evening, and you take care, and we'll see you soon.
You have a great rest of your evening.
You too. Thanks.
Good. Time zones.
Bye.
Bye-bye.